Is Dr. Elinor. Oh my goodness. Well, I can explain
Yeah, wait,
about that, everybody. So Dr. Elinor and I were trying to connect, and we were like last minute connecting. So I completely spaced out on the fact that nobody could hear me. So I didn't put myself on the screen. So you didn't hear my ads.
nobody could hear you, or just I couldn't hear you?
Nobody could hear me because I didn't put myself on the screen. Yes, so there, yes. Sorry, Amy, Philip, and here we are. Let me do your bio quickly.
I'm okay to hear the ad. I think I'd love to hear it. If you're willing to give it again, I'm willing to. I'm interested.
Well, I could go over the whole beginning again.
If we missed it, then sure.
All right, here we go. Hang in there. All right, so I said, did I say all the way back here? I said, Hey Boomer is the podcast where we go beyond the surface, exploring the complexities of family relationships, maintaining health, navigating caregiving, coping with divorce or widowhood, and embracing new relationships. It's the podcast that acknowledges the challenges and opportunities that come with aging with a compassionate and realistic approach. In today's episode, we will focus on the challenges relationships face that could ultimately end in late in life divorce. From 1990 to 1921, the most significant increase in divorce rates was among people 65 and older. The rate tripled during that time, 1990 to 2021. Amazing. I know a lot of my audience out in Hey Boomer land is happily married or happily coupled, and there are also a lot of happily single people who listen. But we all know that there are some listeners who are struggling in their marriages and their relationships. None of us marry expecting that it won't work out. And according to my guest today, Dr. Elinor Robin, late life divorces come in many stages. Some people have been married for years, 40, 50 years, when they decide it's time, they need to move on in their lives. And there are late life divorces that show up in second and third marriages, which makes sense because those marriages don't have as good a track record as first marriages. Mm-hmm. We've also all seen the contentious divorces portrayed in media, and I'm sure we all know people who have had really horrible knockdown, drag-out divorces where the whole intent was to damage the other person. But in today's episode, Dr. Elinor and I hope to present some opportunities for making these endings less painful and leave you with some tips to reduce the conflict that causes so much hurt and destruction when a split does happen. Dr. Elinor is a licensed mental health counselor, a licensed marriage and family therapist, a PhD in psychology with a specialization in conflict management, and she has a certification from the Florida Supreme Court as a mediator and primary mediation trainer. She knows a thing or two about mediating divorce and helping couples resolve conflict and reach compromises that preserve both their self-respect and the relationship. But here, before I bring her on, if you are a long-distance caregiver, then you are going to want to check out CareLink 360. CareLink 360 can provide you with face-to-face communication with your loved one, no matter where they are. Think about people in assisted living who are feeling isolated and alone. You can, with a touch of a button, they can press on your picture and immediately it calls to your phone and you can have a face-to-face conversation with them. In addition, the CareLink 360 provides over 400 health and wellness modules designed around the multiple disease states, interests, and patients' capabilities. The tools include body and brain fitness, speech improvement skills, attention and processing speed exercises, cognitive, physical, and occupational skill development. It really is an all-inclusive tool that will provide you with insights and connectivity to your loved one, no matter how far away they are. It's super simple to use, easy to set up. Just go to mycarelink360/ref/boomer to learn more and use the code BOOMER, all lowercase, at checkout to get 5% off your purchase. And I like to talk about Road Scholar. Road Scholar has been a sponsor of ours for a very long time, and they continue to be my favorite way to travel. I have done so many trips with them. I've made wonderful friends on those trips with Road Scholar. You learn so much. They have outstanding guides. I am actually going to Quebec this summer with some of the people I met at Glacier National Park about a year ago. Highly, highly recommend checking out Road Scholar. Go to roadscholar.org/heyboomer and please use the /heyboomer. It lets them know you found out about their services here. And now, Elinor,
But
let's talk.
I am glad I got to hear all that.
Okay, good. Let's talk about mediation. Can you first describe for me what that is and how it's different than getting two lawyers involved in a divorce?
Okay, so when a couple decides they want to get a divorce, they actually have four options. They could try to figure out a way to have a do-it-yourself divorce, and depending on the state that they're in, there may be available to them forms that they could fill out on their own and file for a divorce. That's usually not a good plan for anyone who um, has anything complicated. You know, if they have assets, it's not a good idea. And I can give you later an example of how that didn't play out for an older couple. Next, they can hire traditional attorneys who will run their case and prepare their case for trial. Or they could hire collaborative attorneys who will give them the process called collaborative divorce, which means that if things go sour and they're unable to resolve the case on their own, the collaborative attorneys will step back and they will have to start over again with traditional attorneys. And then finally, the last option is to hire a mediator on their own. And again, depending on the state that they're in, it may work a little differently, but the mediator will, at the very least, create the marital settlement agreement for them. If they had children, most boomers don't still have minor children, but if they did, the mediator would also create a parenting plan. And in many states, the mediator will also create all of the documents or forms that they need to file for an uncontested divorce. But as soon as the divorce is filed, the mediator steps away because they become unrepresented in front of the court.
Okay, so you said you went through all four, but you said mediation last. How, let's assume you just heard from your partner, I want a divorce.
Yes.
What's the first thing you would think people should do? Do they go to a
Oh,
lawyer? Do they go to a counselor? Do they go to a mediator? What do they do?
I think they should start researching the difference in the options and try to figure out what's the best option for them. When when lawyers are involved, there's of course two lawyers, one for each spouse. When they hire a mediator, there's only one mediator, because the mediator isn't representing anyone. The mediator is there to facilitate their conversation, to help them have a discussion and go through all the items that need to be resolved so that they can negotiate and reach resolution on their own as far as what's the best way to move forward. So often emotions get in the way. If my partner comes to me today and says, we should get a divorce, and I'm all emotional and up in arms, well, then I might not be willing to sit down and negotiate. But if my partner maybe gives me a month or two of time to sit with it and be with it and kind of discuss it with my friends and supporters, maybe I would be willing then to hire a mediator. But one important piece, the mediator cannot do any investigation.
What does that
So
mean?
if I am a spouse who
Mhm.
doesn't know what we have or where it is, the mediator is not going to look into that for me. But an
Mm.
attorney will. An attorney will go through the process called discovery, where they're looking for things. They're doing an investigation. And that investigation will give the attorney information that I don't have if I am the spouse who doesn't know what what he or she makes, or what we have, or where it is, or how much it's worth, or whose name is on the debt. Um,
Okay, so oh, that sounds right. I would think if I'm heading into a divorce, um, the feeling of, well, first of all, obviously we weren't very good communicators, right? If
mhm.
we're getting divorced. And so that's your first challenge as a mediator, but also the trust factor is not there. How do you ever get them to first learn to communicate and then to trust each other?
I often they do trust each other enough to sit and negotiate. They do. And they've been communicating however they've been communicating for the last whatever amount of years. We take them through, I would call it a process, but it's really a series of questions. And if they can answer those questions, starting with, what car do you drive? How much do you think the car is worth? Is there a note on the car, a lien on the car? In other words, are you paying it off or do you own it outright? What retirement accounts do you have? And often they won't know. Is it a 401k or an IRA or a 403b, or they won't know what it is, but that's easy for them to go and find out. So we take them through a process. What vehicles do you have? What retirement accounts do you have? What insurance policies do you have? One thing a lot of people don't know is that on every insurance policy, there's an owner, a beneficiary, and an insured. And often they don't know who the owner is. And that's the most important person, because if you're not the owner of this insurance policy, you don't control who the beneficiary is. And
Mhm.
sometimes they think, oh, I don't need to be the owner. Let him be the owner and he'll have to pay the premium. But guess what? I don't care what your divorce agreement says. When he's on his deathbed, his number one priority is not going to be making the premium payments. And he may change the beneficiary to somebody else, not you. And when he passes, you're getting nothing. So there's a lot of things people need to understand about the logistics, or the financial logistics, we'll say, of getting a divorce. So we take them through this process: the house, real estate, business, bank accounts, debts, and we try to figure it out with them. What's the best way to divide each thing.
So a divorce agreement, a divorce or separation, whatever, is about the assets and the debts, pretty much. Is there any other things that you need to consider besides that?
Yeah, well, and now we're talking really about the boomer population who does
Right,
not have any minor or dependent children anymore, right?
right.
Well, the one other issue is there going to be money that changes hands between them subsequent to the end of the divorce? And that is a big factor. And in that case, this money might be alimony. It might be not called alimony. It might be called something else, like an equalization payment, right?
Spousal support.
Well, spousal support is considered alimony,
Yeah.
but it could be, and but alimony, let's say it's the wife who's paying alimony to the husband, right? And then the husband remarries. Alimony is going to stop. But if it's some kind of equalization payment where she's making these payments to him to equalize their share of the assets, that would not have to stop if he remarries. So it's really important what things are called, and people should know what their options are. So the mediator is typically not going to give people, no, not typically. The mediator is never, hopefully, ever going to give anybody legal advice. But the mediator should be able to give them information so that they know, if I call it this, this is how it's going to play out. If I call it that, that's how it's going to play out. And then they should make, a decision as to what's the best way for them to go. So sometimes, in order to calculate what the alimony is going to be, we need to know what they're spending on a monthly basis to live. And so then we're going down a whole different road.
So should the mediator be aware of the laws of their state surrounding settlement and divorce? Uh,
Definitely. I would never mediate a case for the most part. I mean, there could be some exception, but for the most part, I stick to Florida, whereas I live in Florida. Florida's what I know. I've been teaching mediation and studying mediation for the last 30 some odd years in Florida. I I know very little about the laws outside of Florida. Now, I could go and look it up, but it's not going to be the same as the way I know how things play out in Florida. So I, and there are some mediators who will tell you that they can mediate in 3 states. It's hard enough for me to keep up with different counties in Florida. So I,
Yeah.
I'm to me that's a little concern. I want to stick with somebody who that state is where their expertise is.
Okay, so let's talk gray divorce. I've been married 40, 50 years. I
Hmm.
mean, we've got a lot of stuff,
Yeah.
right? Um, and now I don't know, maybe he got a girlfriend and I'm
Hmm.
like really angry about that.
Hmm.
Can it- can mediation work for me? I just want to put him in a box, you know?
Right. But if you put him in a box, it's gonna there's gonna be a cost to you also. So let's say that your net worth is $800,000. This divorce might, the two of you are going to argue over how to divide the 800,000. But if you hire two lawyers to fight over the 800,000, it's likely that you're going to end up giving them 100,000. And now what you're going to do is pay the two lawyers to fight over how to divide 700,000. So you're going to, and many people, their net worth is not 800,000. If their net worth is 150,000 and now they're giving a piece of it over to the lawyers to fight, it's a lose-lose situation.
But should I have a lawyer look over because like you said, a mediator's neutral, right? They're
Yes.
not representing me, they're not representing my soon to be ex. Um, should I get a lawyer to look over the settlement before we file it?
I think that's a pretty good idea, even though most of our clients do not do it. We encourage in the in everything we say we encourage you to have this reviewed by independent legal counsel as well as independent certified public accountants prior to signing. But most of our clients don't. The agreements that we write, even though many of them are very, very complicated, they are written in simple language and people can read it themselves and they sign. Now, the question is, how knowledgeable are you about the assets and debts of this marriage? And if you're really knowledgeable, then, you have less of a desire to bring it to a lawyer. If you're not knowledgeable, that's when I have concerns, and then I would really want you to bring it to a lawyer.
And so I would not put a lawyer on retainer. I would go just for, would you
Yes.
do the discovery for me?
Well, no, if they're gonna do the discovery, they're gonna be on retainer. But if you're knowledgeable, you can just hire them as a consultant. Some lawyers will do that, some lawyers will not do it. They will not act as a consultant just to read the agreement if you have not retained them. So you may have to try a few lawyers before you find one to give you what you want.
But to do the discovery, they'll need to be on
Well,
retainer?
no. To do real discovery, yes, they would need to be on retainer.
Mm,
But what they might be able to do is say to you, get this, get that, show me this statement, show me that statement, show me this, show me that. Years ago, we had some clients, definitely in the boomer category, and she was a very timid woman and not 100% knowledgeable. And he was, um, we could say he was on the bully spectrum, right?
mm, mhm,
And we sat with them, and he made her an offer, and it wasn't a great offer. And she said, "Oh, I don't know. I have to think about it." We never let anybody sign anything at the first meeting. Never, ever, ever, ever.
mhm,
So eventually, we send them a draft of the agreement. And then she came back to the second meeting. And at the second meeting, she wasn't ready to sign either, but she had a whole list of what she needed from him,
mm,
various statements, etc. Because we keep explaining to people that before you can get divorced, you need to have disclosure between you. Now, currently in Florida, the parties do not have to file financial affidavits,
hmm,
but they have to exchange financial affidavits. But that's a new rule. It used to be they had to file the financial affidavits. So she comes in the second meeting and she says, I need this, I need that, I need this, I need that, I need this statement, that statement, this. And he puts the statements together and he gets her the statements. And then we never see her again. But I was so curious as to what happened that we looked it up on the court's computer and on the court website. And in fact, she had gone out in between, hired a pretty high powered attorney. And by doing what she did, which was sort of like a little bit of a, dirty trick on him, but she saved herself so much money because
hmm,
she was able to give the attorney the discovery he would have had to start writing subpoenas and he
mm.
sure she just collected all this stuff and then gave it to the attorney. And so,
Yeah,
everything
well,
that
but that's
yep.
and, the way you started the story just sparked my interest. You said, he was kind of a bully, she was
Mhm.
very timid. Um, do you ever separate the 2 when you're trying to do mediation?
We don't often, but we can, and we occasionally will. If the overriding rule for mediators is, can this person exercise self-determination? And that means, can they make decisions for themselves? Is this person compromised because they're under duress? They're being coerced. They're a victim of domestic violence and they fear the other person. And when we believe that, then it's time to stop the mediation. Otherwise, we go full speed ahead.
Yeah,
And
so
so,
domestic violence, you can't mediate that.
well, actually, in Florida, we do. So we do mediate cases where there's domestic violence as long as we believe that the victim can exercise self-determination. And often that means that the victim just has to be represented by an attorney. And the argument on that side is if you're the victim of domestic violence and you can't go to mediation, you have to go in front of a judge for a judge to make decisions for you. So now we have further added insult to injury in a way because now the judge is going to make decisions for you, whereas everybody else gets to make decisions for themselves. So why should we punish the victim of domestic violence and make and have them give over their decision-making authority to a judge? So, as long as we believe the victim can exercise self-determination, and often that means that there's an attorney, there can be a victim advocate, um, whatever is
And they've gotta
necessary.
feel safe. They've gotta feel safe to say what they
They've got to
want.
feel, yes, they've got to feel safe. They never have to see the perpetrator. They can be in different rooms. They
Oh,
can be in
okay.
different buildings. They can be on different days. They don't
Okay.
have to sit, they're not going to sit there like most couples do and negotiate it out. They can be totally separate.
Okay, that makes a difference. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So, one of the other things you had talked about when we first met was that a lot of these gray divorces or late in life divorces happen in second and third marriages.
Yes.
And, um, are there usually prenups in those?
Um, Occasionally there is, but often there is not.
And what are the advantages and disadvantages of a prenup?
Well, a prenup is great if everybody is willing to say, yes, this is what we agree to and we're going to follow it. The one problem with prenups is that often the prenup could be 20 years old. And so whatever you wrote in that prenup now no longer applies because things have changed. There's different accounts, there's different houses, there's different businesses. You wrote the prenup when you both worked. Now you both don't work, or one of you works and one of you doesn't. One of you has developed an illness. So that's one problem with prenups. The other problem with prenups is just because you have it doesn't mean the other person is going to say, yes, I'm going to follow it. So the other person might say, no, you lied to me at the time of the prenup. This prenup is invalid, and I'm going to try to hire an attorney to invalidate the prenup because you lied, so there was fraud, or because I was coerced into signing the prenup because I signed it the day before the wedding, or whatever other excuse they're going to come up with. People do try to get out of prenups.
Hmm.
So, but I still am a big believer, and I believe that if you're getting married, and especially if you're, not this is not a youthful first time marriage. If you're getting married and you're over 50, if this person that you're marrying is not willing to sit down and have this important discussion with you, that should be a red flag. Because right now, while you're in the honeymoon stage of love, if they're not willing to sit down and talk about how this is going to play out, how are you ever going to talk about anything with them later on? What's going to happen when there's a your son asks you to borrow $40,000 for whatever reason? If you can't sit down and have that conversation, it really is a red flag.
Hmm. And if they come to you for divorce after they have a prenup, does that make it easier typically? Like, I know you talked about maybe I'm gonna invalidate it, but if they're still on the same page.
If they, yes, if they were on the same page and they're on the same page now, it's simple. It's easy. Many of the people that we see, prenup or no, their divorces are really fairly simple and straightforward. They agree in theory on what should happen with their stuff, especially uh, people in their 50s, 60s, 70s, depending on how things have played out. If this is a very long-term marriage, they realize that everything they have is a marital asset. And
Mhm.
if it's not a really long-term marriage, then often they both came into the marriage with their own assets, and they often will agree just to walk out with their own assets.
Yeah. Um, you said something to me that I thought was a little bit surprising the first time we
Mhm.
talked, and you said, when they're in their 50s or 60s, if they're not planning on remarrying again,
Mhm.
is a divorce really necessary?
And that's something people have to decide on their own, especially when, if it's been a long-term marriage and they believe that everything they have is really joint, then what do they get from getting divorced? Well, now they have, see, one thing, like in Florida, and it's similar in other places, there's some inheritance rights to the spouse. But if I've been married to somebody for 40 years and we just can't stand each other anymore, but I still trust him,
Mhm.
right? Maybe I still want him to be my medical surrogate.
Mm.
And then again, maybe not. Maybe I
Mhm.
want to make sure I'm divorced from him so that I know that if I'm in end of life situation, he's not going to have any authority to be the one who decides pull the plug or not. But
Yeah, so there's a lot
maybe,
of choices. So if you've been married a long time, there's the insurance, there's probably the kids,
yes.
the house, retirement funds.
Maybe I want to stay married to him because I'm concerned that if we get divorced, his girlfriend will now push him to get married. And then when he dies, part of what he owns goes to her.
Mm,
And we had some clients at one point who they had some assets, significant assets, and they were going to get divorced, and the husband was going to remarry, and he said, "Oh no, she's not the new wife. She's not going to get anything because we're going to have a prenup." And I'm like, "What? What are you thinking? You can have a prenup today and next week a new prenup. And in the new prenup, she's getting, or a postnup. And in the new one, she's getting half, which would have meant that on those assets that they were going to continue to own together, the old wife was going to have to deal with the new wife as her new partner on those assets. So
mm, mm,
it
mm,
can get
mm.
very complicated. And
So this is a little unsettling, I mean, we all have been believing, I'm sure,
Mhm.
prenups are for our protection and protecting our assets. And what you're saying is they can be so easily changed or
Well,
litigated or
he would have had to agree to a new prenup, right? Or a postnup. He signs a prenup with her now. She says, I think the deal was all she was going to get was his house. So all the other assets were going to go to the children or the old wife. And that's what the prenup would say. But after a year or two, and maybe he's in poor health, and he she decides, no, I think we should have another postnup now because now I'm your caretaker and I should be entitled to more. Well, eh, that document um is going to play out. Also, he could, in a will, leave everything to the new wife. So sometimes people think they can use a prenup, a postnup, or a divorce settlement in place of a will, and they can't. These documents are not designed to be, in place of a will or a trust. I am often sending people who are older o- to wills, estates, and trust lawyers because I want them to know that what their desire is for their money once they've passed is actually what's going to happen. And if they haven't, done the planning with the wills, estates, and trust lawyer, often that's not the way it's going to play out.
Phew. Lots of yeah, I mean, it's a contract, right? It's a contract. So now you're saying it can change it. Livia says to remain married, you truly have to trust that he doesn't empty accounts and effectively takes all your money.
Yep.
So, wow. Okay,
Yes.
well, um, so when somebody is now considering divorce and they're saying, "Okay, well, I like this idea of mediation. I don't want it to be all hateful and bitter and angry." What should they look for when they're looking for a mediator?
Wow. So I think they want somebody with experience, certainly, somebody that is local to them. Um, I think they should ask around, ask their, friends or um, if for recommendations. I think they should talk to somebody and know, and also what's the pricing. As mediators, we have an ethical responsibility to send people upfront a letter of engagement that explains what the fees and costs are. If they're not clear on what the fees and costs are, that's a red flag. Also, is the mediator overstepping their bounds? And I'll give you an example. I don't think a mediator, and most divorce lawyers will not even create a document called a quadro, which is used to divide certain types of retirement accounts. If the mediator tells you they're going to prepare the quadro, I'm concerned.
Hmm.
That's not the that's not the job of the mediator. The
Hmm.
quadro should be prepared by somebody who is an expert in quadros. Now, many people do not need a quadro. It's only when they're dividing certain retirement accounts. If they're dividing an IRA, they don't need a quadro. But if they're dividing a 401k, they need a quadro.
Or
And
a
that,
403B, like
or a
I
403b,
which was
yes.
my problem. Yeah.
A 403b, yes. But that brings me to the story I said in the beginning. I'll tell you the story later. So was I was making a presentation at a library. This goes back years. I was still living in South Florida as opposed to North Florida where I am now. And I we were there was a group of us making sort of like a group panel presentation that the library wanted to put on for people getting divorced. And so after the presentation, a couple, probably in their late 60s, comes up and starts telling me how they are doing their divorce themselves. And they mentioned to me that the husband is collecting some kind of military pension. And but when he started collecting this military pension, he named her as the successor. So
Mm.
when he dies, she continues to get the money.
Mhm.
They didn't realize that when they get a divorce, whatever it was becomes null and void, and they in fact needed a document. It wasn't a quadro, it was some kind of military pay order. And
Mm.
without that military pay order, when he died, she was getting nothing.
Hmm.
And so sometimes you really don't wanna do it yourself,
Yeah,
you know?
yeah, definitely one of the challenges.
Yes.
Oh boy. All right. So Lots to talk about. So we
Mhm.
talked about, long-term marriages, we talked about second marriage, we talked about prenups, we talked about you can even do mediation if it's been an abusive marriage. We've talked about reasons why you may not need to get
Sorry.
divorced. Um, is there anything that I've not talked about that you feel like would be really important to bring up today?
I just want to reiterate that if you're getting divorced and you're over 50 years old, you want to talk to somebody, an attorney who does wills, estates, and trusts, because it's a good idea to have a will in place, a will or a trust. The attorney would explain the differences, um, and all those medical surrogate type documents, so that if people are using traditional attorneys, that divorce might go on for a year and a half. We don't know what kind of stress, what people are going to be under in that year and a half. I want them to make sure that they're prepared if they turn ill over this year and a half or longer, because some divorces do take longer, that it's clear what would happen to their stuff, and who is going to be in charge of their medical decisions if they're unable to make them themselves.
Okay, that's good. And one final question I was thinking about. So we write up our document, our agreement, everything with our mediator. Do you file it for us then, or do I take it to the court and file it? How does that work?
Well, in my case, we typically will walk over to the courthouse and file it for people, just because we're used to going there, so it's not a big deal for us to go and take it over there. But it depends on the mediator, actually. Some mediators will do that, some mediators won't. We do not electronically file anything here, because since we're not acting as the attorney, just the agreement itself, we could file electronically, and people can file it themselves electronically. But because we provide that additional service of document preparation, that is not something, I believe, a document preparer. This is in Florida. There's no line on that electronic filing. I don't want to get confuse anybody, but
Yeah, yeah.
anyway, we take it over to the courthouse. It's part of what we do.
Okay. All right. And, just FYI, the laws are different in every state.
Yes,
So, a lot of what Eleanor was talking about is probably similar in most states, but
yes.
you still want to check it out and make sure.
Yes, most states are equitable distribution states. A few states are common law states. Like, we always hear about California being common law state. So the rules are different in every state, but there's a lot of similarities, you know?
Yeah. Okay. Eleanor has several websites. As I said, she's got her hands in many different facets of this. And so she has one website called thedivorcecoachinstitute.com where you can find more information. And she also has a website called afriendlydivorce.com. Imagine that,
Yes.
a friendly divorce.
So a friendly divorce is where mediate. That talks about the mediation practice, and all the mediators on there are in Florida. But the Divorce Coach Institute is a site where divorce coaches are listed, and people can learn also to be a divorce coach there. And that the intent for that site is that there will be coaches from all over the world. We're in our infancy there on the Divorce Coach Institute. But my hope, because I really believe that having a coach through divorce can really make a difference for people, my hope is that we will eventually be international.
Well, I mean, I'm a coach. I'm a life coach, not a divorce coach, but I agree, because it takes you forward instead
Yeah.
of dragging you back, looking backwards. Coaching takes you forward. So it might be something worth looking into if you are facing a divorce right now. Let me remind you about our sponsors, mycarelink360.com. Go there, /ref/boomer. Check out all that their device, which is called the Digital Health Companion. Check out all of what that offers to your loved ones. This is something that you, as the adult child or the adult relative, would purchase for your loved one who does not live close and you want to help them with staying connected. Check out roadscholar.org/heyboomer for all of the amazing trips. Come visit and join us in Quebec. Go see the rest of the world. They're in all 50 states and over 100 countries. And let me just tell you this. If you want to support what we're doing at Hey Boomer, we have a couple of ways to do it. You can become a Boomer believer. And with that, you get a monthly visit with one of our guests from the month, where we spend some time in that hour talking to them, asking them questions, learning from them. So it's a much more intimate conversation than what you are able to have as a listener. We also have the monthly Boomer Banter, which is a community of boomers, and we always have a topic. I facilitate the conversation. We're building friendships, we're building wisdom, we're laughing, we're learning. It's a wonderful, caring community. So check out buymeacoffee.com/heyboomer0413 to become either a Boomer Banter member or a Boomer believer. Okay, let me tell you about our guest for next week. Next week, we're going to be talking with Susie Rosenstein. And Susie is a master certified life coach, and she's the host of two popular podcasts for midlife women. One is called Women in the Middle, Loving Life After 50, and her newest one is Women in the Middle Entrepreneurs. To continue our discussion about relationships, Susie and I are going to explore the challenges and rewards of blending families. We're going to talk about when our children marry and bringing in, their new spouses and those traditions from the spouses' families, or the fact that our children may go celebrate some holidays with the spouse family and not with us anymore. We're going to talk about when our siblings marry, and now they may be doing separate things for holidays, or they may bring in more people for the family traditions. And then, of course, if we marry or partner up late in life, we are now bringing our long-term traditions and our partner's long-term traditions and all those family intricacies together. So there's potential minefields there and potential wonderful, wonderful connections. So hopefully you will join Susie and I for that next week. Each episode of Hey Boomer is an invitation to listen, learn, and apply the wisdom gained from the episode that you just heard to your own life. The path ahead may not always be easy, but it's traveled best with support and shared insights. Elinor, thank you so much. This is very, very knowledgeable and great information you shared with us.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Yeah. My name is Wendy Green. I am the producer of Hey Boomer, and the music you heard at the beginning is from Griffin Honrado. He is a student at the North Carolina University School of the Arts and my grandson.